Why is it that we spend hours grinding in a video game or obsessing over a televised sports event, but work and school feel like an absolute soul-destroying experience? The answer may be obvious, but The Game of Work by Charles Coonradt answers it so profoundly that the book is a total game changer, literally. If you really like sports, then this book is going to be for you. Pretty much the entire book is a giant sports analogy trying to compare it to business, and the reasons why business sucks stand out so obviously in ways that you would never have thought without reading this book and trying to compare it to a sports world. What we're looking at here is a pie chart breakdown of the chapters. You can see that most of the material is based on chapters 1, 3, and 11. If I had to choose a chapter for you to pick up and read, chapter 11 is by far the best, followed by chapter 1. Chapter 3 is good, but after that there's a significant drop off in my opinion. Don't take it the wrong way, I'm not saying that the rest of the book is bad. Chapters 1 and 11 are just so good that it makes the other chapters pale in comparison. It's my recommendation then that if you do pick up the book, just read chapters 1 and 11 if nothing else. Though obvious, it says the exact reasons why we enjoy recreation so much more than work, and if it's possible to emulate these work environments just like in our recreational activities. Part of the reason we focus on chapter 1 so much is because there's so many analogies that are extremely useful for us to understand why we like recreation so much more than our work environments. Right away, we get 5 reasons why we're so much more enthusiastic about putting work into our recreational activities rather than our jobs. That brings us to reason number 1. In recreation, goals are clearly defined. To demonstrate this, he wants to envision that we're at a golf course with a ridiculous conversation. And it goes like this. I'm here to play. Do you have a map? We don't have a map of the course anymore. How will I know where to play? Where's the first tee? With property values so high, we converted half the course into condos. As a result, we changed some rules. There's no longer a first tee. Do you have a second tee? We don't have a second tee or any other tees anymore. What about greens? We don't have them either. Are the boundaries gone too? Yes, except that it's off limits to hit a ball into somebody's yard. How do I play? Well, we analyze why people play golf, and the big reason is exercise. Here's a pedometer. Go out and walk 6,700 yards wherever you wish. You don't need a caddy because you're only taking along one club. Stop and swing it whenever you wish, a minimum of 70 times, until you feel like you've had a normal amount of exercise for an 18-hole game of golf. The activity is still the same, and you still get the same exercise. You can swing the club, and you never have to look for a lost ball. This brings me back to when I first started as a tax preparer for a public accounting firm. Realistically, there were no expectations of me. They kind of just threw tax returns at me, and I would kind of submit them and kind of hope for the best. And, I never really did any of them on my own. I always had to have someone else help me with them because there were complexities and rules that I just didn't know. And that's one of the pains in the ass about being a lawyer or being in accounting or something so heavily law-based is you have to really be aware of all the mechanical moving parts that can kind of influence each other, right? And furthermore, how many tax returns was I supposed to prepare? There was no guideline or goal. They didn't give me a number. What number would have been disappointing for them? That would have been extremely helpful. If I only prepared 5 returns in a week versus 25, I literally had no conception of what they wanted from me. They didn't tell me anything. They just kind of threw tax returns at me and expected me to complete them with the help of managers usually. So by not having any idea of what was expected of me, I kind of just sat there clueless, like, I guess I'll just try my best, but I don't know where I'm supposed to be here, In recreation, scorekeeping is better because it's more objective, self-administered, peer-audited, dynamic, and players can compare current personal performance with past performances, also with an accepted standard. Every runner keeps score. When you run a mile, do you keep track of your mile time? The majority of you are probably saying yes. A huge added benefit of this also is you receive immediate feedback. You can compare yourself with past performances. If you go up to the 18th tee and destroy the ball over the fence, you don't have to wait for the 6-month interview to know you blew it or you hit it towards the 17th hole accidentally. You've been keeping your own score for the prior 17 holes and know exactly where you stand compared to your peers and your prior performances. That brings us to reason number 3. Feedback is more frequent in recreation. What if the NFL commissioner walked on the field during the Super Bowl to determine the best team and said to the players, "We are going to be businesslike in our approach to football. We aren't going to keep score, we will watch the game, and then meet and decide which team played the best, and we'll let you know in 3 months." In recreation, fortunately, you don't have to wait for your boss to tell you how you're doing because you know what the score is as the game progresses, and nobody can change that just because they don't like you. Feedback is accurate and frequent, and everybody knows how to keep score in sports. If you want to improve the quality of performance in any area, you simply improve or increase the frequency of feedback. Increasing the frequency of feedback gives you more opportunities to catch and eliminate problems of a solvable size. People wouldn't run marathons if they didn't know where the finish line was, if they were told to just do whatever they can, right? You have a 26-mile marker, and that's the end of the race. Plus, you also time yourself. Timing yourself is one of the more fun things about it, right? For example, if you finish in 5 hours the first time and then you do it in 4 hours and 30 minutes in the second time, you're going to be pretty happy with the results. Consequently, if you do it in 4 hours and 30 minutes the first time, then in the second time you do it 5 hours, you'll have lost 30 minutes. And you'll be like, what the hell happened? How did I get so much worse, right? And you'll be pissed off with that. And you can see that. You can only see that because you have objective results. Fourth, in recreation, participants feel like they have a higher degree of choice. When you were 7 years old, what did you say about going outside? Do I have to go play outside, or are you going to go play outside? But at work and school, I have to go to school, I have to go to work, I have to do this assignment, I need to do my taxes. Part of the reason for liking recreational activities is because we have a choice in the matter. Managers have to ask themselves if they're using the principles of choice when giving out assignments to employees. Are people being allowed to perform in areas where they have natural interests and abilities, or is their business like the army of old, where bakers were ordered to drive the trucks? When people feel that they have no choice in what they're doing, they lose enthusiasm and their performance suffers. And this is so applicable in school as well as work. I enjoyed sports a lot growing up, and school didn't really offer me an opportunity to do that other than once a week for an hour at physical education. That was a joke. Not everyone was enthusiastic to play sports the way that I fucking hated going to music class and art class. Those are a waste of time to me. All my talents lied in sports and such, you know? And equally, on the flip side, do you think the people that enjoyed arts and crafts and music really wanted to go play sports throwing balls around? That wasn't their interest, but you have no choice in the matter. You're forced to do something you don't want to do, and yeah, I think it's important that you have exposure to things, but when you're young like that, you already know where some of your natural interests lie. Maybe you don't know everything that you like, but you have a pretty good idea of what you want to spend your time doing. Sitting in the classroom for 6 or 7 hours a day was complete and total torture for me. So by 4th grade, when you're already in the school system for a few years and you're sitting at classrooms all day long and you're kind of bored out of your mind, of course your enthusiasm is going to be shot. You hate what you're doing. What are you going to go do right after school is probably what you want to be doing most of the day. 5th, in recreation, they don't change the rules in the middle of the game. In basketball, 2 and 3-point shots are decided in the off season, not during the middle of the game. Chapter 1 ends with this final analogy. The store owner is chewing out the meat manager and says they need to start making money and that they'll begin nickel and diming. Miss Jones comes in an hour later with a complaint about roast beef she bought, and she approaches the meat manager and he starts giving her a difficult time about it. She gives up and goes to the store manager, who says, "No problem, Miss Jones. I will take you back and explain to that meat manager of mine how we are going to have customer satisfaction around here." Case in point about changing rules. In football, it would be ridiculous if they said that a running back scored too easily and that the touchdown was only worth 4 points because of it. Changing the rules mid-game adds uncertainty. Good managers try to minimize uncertainty. Workers, like athletes, will do so much better if they know where they stand and know the score. Certainty creates a sense of security about workplace environments, and by not changing the rules mid-game, it goes a long way towards minimizing uncertainty. Everything we do in recreation is goal-oriented. Video games, basketball, whatever. It's interesting though, because when we think about people who are musically and artistically inclined, they're not necessarily able to quantify an exact score per se of what they're doing, or they have a musical piece they want to finish working on or play for someone. Chapter 2 is pretty short, but it does make a really interesting point about people and their relationship with making money. Unless we have a place to actually put money, we don't have a reason to make the money, and therefore we never really do. If we did have a reason to make the money, and we had somewhere to put it, as in something specific we wanted to spend it on, we'd already be doing it, right? Chapter 2 contains one of the most difficult pills to swallow in the entire book. He uses the example in the book: if you're used to making $40,000 and then one night you just decide you want to make $100,000 without really a need to make $100,000, you're probably not going to be able to sustain the personality shift required to make that $100,000, and you'll probably stick to $40,000. If you do make that shift, you might be able to make a few $1,000s or something, but it won't be $60,000. Not on average, at least. The book makes the argument that the primary responsibility of managers is to create scorecards and set the rules. The old scorekeeping system, or no system at all, forces employees to wait for feedback from management, thinking, "I'm not going to venture from here until I know how I did." Like I had emphasized earlier, I had no clue what was going on when it came to my feedback. How many tax returns was I supposed to do? No clue. How did I do on the tax returns I did? No clue. Why would I change my approach to how I was doing them if I didn't know how I was doing in the first place? Imagine watching or playing a baseball game and the batter has no idea how many strikes and balls there are. The umpire just tells him when he's out or when he's allowed to go walk to first base. That would be ridiculous. In Chapter 3, he tells us about 3 methods of management that are visibly seen in most companies. 2 of them are not great, and one of them seems pretty useful. He gives us the story of sales manager John, and he sees 2 salesmen laughing in the lunchroom together. What John doesn't know is that one of them just lined up a person that John's been chasing for 4 years. So as he walks by the lunchroom, he says, "Listen, if you two would get to work, we wouldn't be slumping." This is the definition of judging a book by its cover. You can't capture all relevant events in a single instance like this. It's kind of like when a cheerleader is yelling at the ref for the wrong call while she had her back turned to the crowd while the play was going on. This reminds me of the story that Simon Sinek used in one of his talks about two kids being on a subway being extremely rambunctious and disruptive to all the people on the train with them. The two kids were running around and distracting everyone, and it was starting to piss people off. So one person turned to the, guardian of the two children and said, "Dude, what are you doing? These kids are running around like crazy and driving everyone nuts. How can you not notice that?" The guardian turns to the person and says, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I was just thinking about how to tell these kids that their mother's dead." Because we're human beings, our nature makes it so much easier to observe the negative than the positive. And you can't win using this method for management. We're built this way, evolutionarily, and we wouldn't have gotten this far without it. The second method is what he calls the judgment method. Sometimes we hear boomers saying something like, "Kids don't work as hard as I used to." Instead of making huge negative generalizations, we should really just be more specific. Instead of saying huge statements like, "all these millennials suck," ask how much sales are down, how many calls didn't get made, or what specific behavior you're concerned about. This doesn't just apply to management methods either. We can really just benefit from this in the rest of our lives. We have to be able to measure things in our life to make progress. Measurement is exact and relevant, just like a scorecard or scoreboard. Exact measurement makes work as enjoyable as play because participants have a way to win. If this is so obvious, why aren't more people in business doing it? The sad answer is people think it's too time-consuming, and they might even be afraid of the truth that they're not doing a good job. Simply put, you just can't win without knowing the score. There's three kinds of workers. There's those who know that they're winning, those who know they're losing, and those who turn off the scoreboard. People who keep score, whether winning or losing over the long term, tend to win more. These folks accept responsibility for their actions. You achieve financial independence by knowing the score, even when things aren't going smoothly. If you have courage to keep score even when losing, you'll win more over the long term. This is easily one of the most important concepts in the entire book. When you look at a basketball scoreboard, it doesn't necessarily tell you about lucky tip-ins or hard-fought rebounds. Some plays you put in more effort than in others. In baseball, on a box score, when we see a single, most of the time we assume that the ball was hit to the outfield, maybe with 1 or 2 bounces. What we don't necessarily see is those kind of lucky hits. Sometimes there's a bloop single in a weird angle where a shortstop, third base, and left field couldn't get to the ball, and it just happened to drop in this little tiny area. When you look at basketball, what do you see? In basketball, when you see a three-point shot, you don't necessarily know, unless you were watching it, if the defender was actually in the guy's face. Three-point shots where the player was left wide open count the exact same as 2 people defending 1 guy. Stock football scores don't tell you how many interceptions were made and about dropped receptions that should have been caught. But the individual player in the position who got the tips, who got the blocks, who got those lucky bloop singles, they can tell you all about it. And they'll know exactly how many kind of lucky sort of occurrences happen like that, not just for the game, but for the entire season and probably the last year too. But it's not shown in those kind of statistics. When we looked at those bar graphs at my old lunch meetings at my old job as a tax preparer, we only saw the finished number of tax returns people had. What those numbers didn't tell us is how complex the returns were, who had to spend how much time doing which ones were extra long, which ones were really small. The tax returns I completed were probably all really small ones. Think of how devastating that would be for a project that you're working on. You've put hours and hours into something, maybe it's at your job or something else, and then all people see is the final number, and that's all they care about. Most people only see the tip of the iceberg. There's all that struggling at the bottom of the iceberg, but only people will see the top of all the success and, oh, he did this many projects. They didn't see you going crazy over here at the bottom of the iceberg. The book also talks about how cross-country runners have their own stopwatch when the gun goes off, so they know the score the entire time they're running. Scorekeeping needs to offer a comparison between current personal performance, past performance, and an accepted standard. In business, there's sometimes an artificially imposed standard. Scorekeeping should allow players to review their performance during the game. Most businesses still have 12 accounting periods just like before World War II. In the corporate world, you won't know how you did in March until the middle of April, and by then, it's way too late to make mid-March adjustments because it's already April. Work is like bowling, except there's a person called the supervisor who stands in front of the pins with a curtain. The supervisor sees the pins, but the bowler can't. The bowler throws the ball, hears something, and asks how he did. The supervisor responds, "Move your foot." The bowler throws another ball and then asks again, "How did I do?" The supervisor then says, "Put some tape in the thumb hole." The bowler persistently asks again, "How am I doing?" The supervisor says, "Don't worry about it. We have a review coming up in 6 months. You will know then." Bowling would obviously be extinct under these conditions. The truth is painful and often frightening. Furthermore, in American culture, we focus on problems and are reluctant to regularly compliment and praise. We talk about what goes wrong instead of right. As a result, subordinates are depreciated with more emphasis on shortcomings than accomplishments. Work consists of what a body's obliged to do, and play consists of what a body's not obliged to do. Choice drives America. We spill American blood on foreign soil in order to defend our right to vote, just so half of us can stay home during every election. Choice is what compelled me to make this video. Book reports in middle school and high school sucked because I had no choice to do so. Life is comprised of have to and wants. We enjoy what we want to do and are far from excited from what we have to do. Why don't we enjoy work then? Because our choices are extremely restricted. We're told exactly what to do and in what manner it has to be done. Nobody has fun and nobody performs well when they're not having fun. Once again, we go into another interesting story. He consulted with a company that built modular housing. Carpenters were the main employees. When they tracked the total square footage completed by the employees, it amounted to about 44,000 square feet in around 5 days. There was a deer hunt later that week that was important to some of the carpenters, and the supervisors went to the VP of manufacturing and asked if they could get off work early on Friday. The VP said if you get the 44,000 square feet done by Friday at noon, you can leave then. Chuck suggested they allowed the workers to choose the day they get off work as long as the 44,000 square feet were finished, and the VP agreed. After all was said and done, the workers were so motivated that they left by 2 p.m. on Wednesday. This begs the question, why was the work done so fast? Because they had a choice. Before, they had to work until 5 on Friday. When they had the opportunity to do what they wanted, they were willing to do it. If you want to motivate your workers, if you want them to feel like members of the team, you must give them the freedom to choose and succeed. If they do, they'll come through for you. When I was in school, I hated having to be there till 2 or 3 p.m. It was extremely infuriating. I had no choice in the matter, and I felt like my soul was dying. This is no different from the regular workplace. Could you imagine a world where we're allowed to leave work early if we get our work done? Chapter 6 starts off with another story that's kind of similar to the meat manager story that we saw earlier. There was a retail employee who was chewed out for allowing excessive customer returns. 2 hours later, the employee is unknowingly talking to a good friend of the manager who wants to return something that wasn't purchased in the store. The manager and the employee have different perceptions of the field of play which have never been clearly defined. The employee is suddenly confused. The field of play is not clear, and for the rest of the day, that employee soon hid in a corner. You can't change rules in the middle of the game without destroying the self-confidence of the player. Back at my old job, I was supposed to be working in the downtown office the whole time, but at that time we had merged with a small firm, and they needed one more person in their office. I was only 2 months into my job roughly at that point. Even though I really didn't have the experience that they wanted, the main partner at my firm sent me over there. The stipulation was I was only going to be there for 1 week and then I would return back to the downtown office as if normal. The following Monday, I got a call from the other partner at the other office with 3 people in it. He had asked me why I hadn't showed up to work, and I said, well, I'm in the downtown office. He was really not happy with me and I didn't understand why. I hadn't even logged into my email that morning. I was one of those people that don't check their email over the weekend. Anyway, I'd never had this conversation, but apparently I was supposed to show up the next week and stay there until October 15th. Even though I had worked at the other office for like 2 months, I ended up working 3 months at the other office, which is what I never really signed up for. While the experience was okay overall, that completely destroyed my self-confidence. Here I was getting conscripted to go to a new office without signing up for it, and I was also going to be there for months and months at a time without ever having consented to it, really. You want to talk about destroying my self-confidence. I thought that was brutal. I was ready to work in the downtown office for most of the time. It's a classic case of the rules being changed in the middle of the game. Chuck worked with the fast food company and asked one of the managers in the meeting, do you have any fears in this company? The manager said yes. Chuck asked, what are you afraid of? The manager said, I'm afraid of being fired. Of course, the partner was thinking, if you were doing something bad, wouldn't you be gone? This is when Chuck asked, since you're afraid of being fired, tell me one thing, if you knew you were doing it, you'd be gone. The guy said he couldn't answer that. And this was very surprising to the partner. A person who's in constant fear did not know would get him fired. The next day, an 18-point list was passed out and basically what Chuck calls an out-of-bounds statement. It spelled out exactly what would get you fired. If they didn't like it, they're free to find employment elsewhere. If they agree, then they are free from worry about what might cause them to lose their job. They already know what might cause them to lose, so they can concentrate on winning within the rules without fear. No coach would enter a critical championship series and have someone say, sorry coach, you don't have any timeouts, no halftime with the players, no time between quarters. No coach would accept that, but in business, we seem perfectly content to accept the job description with annual or semi-annual review sessions only. One of the biggest problems in business today is that nobody tells you what's expected of you exactly. Oftentimes we're given kind of vague standards that, we can kind of get around with, but for the most part, things aren't crystal clear. When I was 19 years old and I was working in an internship, I showed up to that job the first day, kind of shook some hands, went to my computer with the help of some people, and then they just disappeared for 3 or 4 hours and I did nothing until I had lunch. For a 19 or 20-year-old, I knew I was supposed to be doing something, but they had nothing for me and I didn't understand that at the time. But I felt like I was doing a terrible job. I thought I was supposed to be working all the time, at least when you're 19 or 20 years old. Every time a salesman meets a potential customer, a sale is made. Either the customer buys the product or the salesman buys the excuse. In life, you don't win occasionally and you don't win by accident. Winning's kind of a habit. Losers tend to be negative and very general. Negativism is a cancer of the mind. Even if it's our natural state, it's still horrible for us. Winners see the glass half full, not empty. Winners see opportunity and losers see problems. The book then says something interesting. Winners say I, me, and ours, and then losers say they, them, those guys, management, and non-committal language. J. Van Andel, member of the chairman of the board of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, said, "We are not going to help the caboose catch up to the engine by stopping the train. We need to seek change and improvement, but too many want to change the rules for an easy shortcut and for a free lunch so they can receive the benefits of winning without having to play the game." Losers refuse to face facts. That's why they keep losing. But winners face up to what's happening and track it. That winning attitude gives them the knowledge they need to win. Chapter 8 also goes into the Pareto's principle. It's the 80-20 rule we've all heard before, but for those of you who don't know, I'll just kind of go into it. Whenever you look at the production of something in totality, usually 80% of it is completed by 20% of it, maybe employees or machines or whatever. If I had to guess at my old tax firm, there were probably about 20% of employees that were actually getting shit done versus me being part of the 80% of people who really weren't getting stuff done. Granted, I was new, but that was just the reality at the time. You could probably also look at that company and see how many of the clients were making up for 80% of the sales. If you looked at the old company's revenue, you'd probably see 80% of the revenue given by about 20% of the client base. The rule is not perfect all the time. Sometimes it's like 83-17 or 77-23, but the overall trend remains the same. I know that when we saw who completed how many tax returns, there were a few of them that were absolute horsemen and kept running through it. For people like me, even though I was an auditor, I didn't do that many tax returns. I didn't do that much audit either. Management must provide workers with a clear expectation to know whether they're winning or losing. This is where results to resources ratio is introduced, or RRR in the book. He thinks about it as yards per game or yards per carry versus like sales per hour or tax returns per month or something like that. Overall, it's a great way to track things, and it's probably applicable in one way or another to many places. The highlight to use this metric is to use PER. The PER is able to activate the relationship between results and resources. Chapter 10 does an excellent job of talking about athletes and them trying to prove themselves and how scouts have to take chances on those players before they're superstars. For example, it's really easy when Kobe Bryant is worth millions and millions because he's an all-star and he's proved himself. But it's really hard to do it with an 18-year-old who's right out of high school. How are you supposed to know which ones are going to succeed and which ones won't? Really, they're kind of gambling almost in a weird way because they're giving the guy a lot of money hoping he'll be a superstar in a few years. By contrast, in business, it's also applicable. In business, we also have to interview and hire people we know very little about. However, once they're on our team, it's our responsibility to discover, nurture, and turn to the value of untapped potential, in many cases, immediately. Winners believe in themselves and see a relationship between past accomplishments and future assignments. And third, winners have a commitment for future team direction. That was novel, but this is where it starts to get very fascinating. What you're really looking for is coachability. Make no mistake, for every winner, there's a coach in the background somewhere. Winners recognize that good coaches have knowledge beyond their own capabilities, and they're willing to assimilate this through the coach. When Reggie Bush entered New Orleans as a Saint, the coach probably said something along the lines, "You'll carry the ball 20 to 35 times per game. We expect you to be close to 5 yards per carry on average, and we expect you to decoy and block on this number of plays. You're also supposed to catch so many passes, sit on the bench when we're doing XYZ. Do you have a problem with that?" Reggie might have responded, "Well, in college, we didn't do it that way. I don't think I should have to block or catch anything but screen passes, and I don't want to sit on the bench. I've talked to other running backs, and your expectations are unrealistic." Can you imagine how ridiculous that would be? Typically, when you hire new employees, you have their undivided attention until the first coffee break when they meet another employee, someone who's been around a long time or has a confused or warped picture of the field of play. The new employee comes back from coffee with his tie undone and sleeves rolled up, and it's, "Chuck, baby, what's cooking?" To avoid this, he recommends when you hire new people, do not let them out of sight for the first 48 hours. Have them in all your meetings, take them to lunch, don't even let them go to the restroom unless you know they're going to be alone. Make sure employees get a clear understanding of the correct field to play right from the beginning. Most of the way people respond in an organization and assess it in their minds is primarily dependent on their relationship with the person to whom they report. When an employee comes aboard, the manager is in the driver's seat, receiving respect and appropriate responses from the new employee. That respect remains until expectations are not met. It's imperative that expectations be understood and clearly defined. What drove me insane at my old firm was I didn't have one single manager. I had a bunch of managers who had all these projects, What drove me absolutely nuts is that you could have one manager where you need to submit it a certain way because they like it that way, and then you could do it to another manager where they want it a completely different way. They want it way more detailed, and it makes me want to blast my head off because I'm doing 3 times as much more work for the person that wants it detailed in this manner. Why would I want to submit it to the manager who makes me do 4 times as much work for no added benefit when I could just give it to this manager and do her project when it's just so much simpler? Some of the other employees actually complained about that with me, that there's not a uniform way to do tax returns, at least for the managers at that firm, and that was a big problem I had. Alright, chapter 11. This is probably the best chapter in the whole book. He begins by telling us that there's no such thing as an unmotivated person. Teens who are too tired to mow the lawn on Sunday might be actually saving their energy for a date. In that instance though, they're not motivated by the direction of their parents. The big question is how to get motivations in the areas we desire, and how to get ourselves and others motivated around us, and how to get ourselves and others motivated in business pursuits. In order to get more of it, we need to understand it first. The first type of motivation is fear. Parents use it all the time on children and bosses on workers. Once again, he mentions only professional endeavors, but he doesn't actually mention anything about teachers on school children, but I think that's a huge one. When you have the donkey cart at the bottom of the hill, the fear motivator is like the little man cracking the whip. Like most fear motivators, he's sitting down. The theory is simple but doesn't always work. Sometimes the donkey kicks you back or sits down. If the hill's steep enough and the load's heavy, the donkey gets to the point where he'd rather take a beating than continue. People are the exact same. Sometimes salespeople get to a point where they would rather sit in the office and starve rather than get out and work. Most offices have people who are starving to death. The best thing you can do is fire them. People are self-determined. You've got to let them do what they want to do. Think about a drug addict trying to quit. You can't quit for them. They can only do it themselves. It's an unfortunate reality of the world we live in. If they want to starve, you can't stop them, but you don't need to pay them while they're doing it. The main problem with the fear motivator is you need someone to crack the whip and watch every donkey. That's very expensive. It's borderline like slavery. The next alternative is to use incentive motivation. You get a long stick, tie a carrot on the end, and hold it out in front of the donkey's nose. This will work, but there's 5 situations where that carrot method won't actually work. The first situation is when the donkey isn't hungry enough. Sometimes you have a donkey that's content with 1,500 carrots a month and you put him in a job where he can earn 3,000 carrots a month and he'll slow down his performance to catch up with his expectation and needs. He isn't hungry. Take real estate for example. If someone's used to $2,000 a month, his boss tells him to go out and get new listings every 3 days. He does it. The boss makes one of the biggest mistakes in the world. He sells the house for a new person, paying him $6,000 in one day. Now his checking account is bigger than his self-image. He can't get his self-image up, so he waits for the checking account to go down. The second one is where the carrot just isn't big enough. He looks at the carrot, looks back at the cart, looks at the hill, sees the relationship there, and says, fuck that. If you think I'm going to pull all this for just one lousy carrot, you're insane. The third problem occurs when the road is just simply too steep. You're not able to ask more than what they're able to do. Sometimes taking a class, learning a new skill, or gaining more product knowledge will actually solve this. The fourth is when the load is too heavy. This is when somebody says, I know I can make a lot of money in business, but do you know how many calls I have to make one sale? The fifth he discovered by accident in a lecture, and I was thinking of this during the book. Someone in the audience asked him, what if the donkey doesn't like carrots? He then goes into the story of there's a beautiful television worth $2,000 in those days that was actually possible. One sales guy then pokes the other. Big deal. If I want, I'd have to spend $4,000 to redo the family room just to get it in. He thought that a $2,000 carrot would cost $4,000 to accept. That's another bad carrot situation. When the executive guy says work hard and we'll make you a sales manager, the worker thinks, manager, someone has to work 30% longer hours, 10% more money, with 3 times the heart attack rate and 6 times the divorce rate? I don't like your carrot. You'll then slow down performance right before the prize. Make sure if you use carrots that they will actually like them. We all know money will only go so far. The problem with the public accounting firms is they want to make you work 50 or 60 or 70 hours on something that's, mildly interesting, but you couldn't pay me enough money in the world to make me work those hours. Those carrots don't matter to me. You could give me $300,000 and it just wouldn't matter to me that much that I'm not able to use it and enjoy my life. My time is extremely valuable, and at some point, time is actually worth more than the money. Donkeys might respond to carrots and whips, but people don't. Look how long it took us to get rid of slavery. People respond best to their own goals if they have them. Reaching a goal is a form of winning, and people like to win. People who are trying to win by reaching clearly defined goals don't necessarily need carrots and whips to incentivize them. Winning is its own reward for them. The third and easily the most effective form of motivation is self-motivation. It occurs when people can choose their own goals and decide how they want to achieve them. If I offered you $1,000 to call me Mr. Gringo instead of John, you'll be motivated very quickly. $1,000 is a strong motive. Well, call me Mr. Gringo is an easy action. If I gave you a quarter to run 10 miles with 50 pounds on your back, You would also think I was crazy. Here we can see the action outweighs the motive. The key to motivation is providing motives that outweigh desired actions. When the motive outweighs the action, you're gonna get results. And this is where the book gets very conceptual, and I love this part. Everybody in the world has a balance beam in their head. Motivation is simply the process of piling things on the other side until movement occurs and action gets off the ground. If you're an incentive motivator and nothing happens, you get a bigger carrot. But in a time of shrinking profits, you can't really afford bigger and bigger carrots. It would be nice to give everyone $100 grand a year and 12 weeks PTO. The majority of companies will go broke offering that big of a carrot. And sometimes you run into workers that don't want carrots. In order to get more motivation beyond whips and carrots, you must create a place where people are closely linked to grow together with the business. What's in it for me will always be present in a new situation where people are asked to perform. Oftentimes, the question is not verbalized because employees don't want to seem selfish, they don't want to look like assholes. Another important question is, why should I? Children ask this a lot until they hear the non-answer, because I said so, many times until they give up asking. Parents give this non-answer because they don't know or they're too lazy to figure out the real answer. We'd be better off saying, I don't know. I remember being 7 years old, my brother was probably 4 or 5 at the time, and we were talking to our neighbor who was 6 years old at the time. We were literally bitching and moaning about how much we hate hearing the answer, because I said so, and we probably were on that for 5 or 10 minutes. This was a fascinating revelation. When people ask you with their mouth or eyes, what's in it for me, or why should I, they're trying to get self-motivated. They're essentially saying, Mr. Manager, my incentive beam isn't actually tilted yet. I haven't decided to go or do whatever you want me to. Can you help me out with that? Let me understand more. Tell me again. Tell me more. Motivate me. There's something about being a human being that makes it impossible for us to do something until we understand why. Just looking at that again was extremely painful. How many times has something like that happened at your job or your school? Think about yourself in your office and your other peers and their motivations. How well do you know people at your workplace? Do you know their spouse's name? Do you know the age and primary activities of his or her kids? What hobbies does this person have? How involved in these hobbies is this person? Where would said person like to be in 3 years in the company? If your workplace went out of business, what would this person turn to make a living? This is where we get the employee awareness questionnaire. I recommend you at least give it some thought about your current workplace and see how many of these questions you can answer for other people. The employee awareness questionnaire is comprised of 8 questions. The first one is name the name of the employee's spouse or significant other. Ages and first name of children. List 3 favorite non-work activities, what their performance level is, and what awards or special recognition the person has received. Name one thing each of their children is good at. What do they think their next position in the company will be? In their mind, how soon will he or she be ready to accept it? How closely does this agree with your assessment? Do you know what they would do if the company went out of business? Where does this person like to invest money? And what are the person's 3 greatest fears? The vast majority of us can't actually answer most of these questions with most of our coworkers. This proves how fragile our relationships are with our coworkers and other people at our companies. I could probably not even name one of those 8 with most of the coworkers I had at my old job. The point that he wants to make here is nobody can motivate a stranger with consistency. Your ability to motivate them is directly related to how well you know them and how well you're able to match company goals with their desires. You need to know as much as possible about them to motivate them. Like we looked at earlier, that's why it's so hard to hire people you barely know anything about. A silly example that I can think of from the school days is having a pizza party. If the students do well enough on a test, they'll get a pizza party. Yeah, it might be fun for the teacher and make their ego feel good, but did the students really want a pizza party, especially when you get slices that are this thin? Sometimes schools and employees want to give rewards that we just don't care about. A pizza party at school was meaningless for us, especially if we had to put in all this work just to get a slice of pizza that's not even that big. It brings us to an even greater point at the end of this chapter, that nobody can do what you can do unless you have all the information that you do. You can't expect people to think like you unless they have the information that you do. This is so fascinating because it gets maybe a little bit of coverage in the book, but really it applies to all of life. If we all had the same information, we'd all vote the same, we'd all have more or less some of the same jobs. I mean, when it comes to politics, most of the politics we have is divided because we don't have the same information. One side will focus on one bit of information, the other side will focus on the other. And there you have it. Just by looking at this video, you've basically read the whole book. I took the most important parts and tried to break them down for you in a way that was easy to digest. The video was a lot longer than I thought it would be, and it took a lot longer than I thought it would to make, but the book certainly deserved it, and I tried to do it justice. I hope you also enjoyed this presentation. Write what you thought the most interesting concept in the book was in the comments.